Hello friends, today we're going to look at how I made this turn of the century sounding atmospheric drum and bass tone. And what do I mean by that? Well, in the late 90s, that intelligent drum and bass sound started to get a little more futuristic and science fiction-y. And it's the type of music you would expect to hear on like the main menu for Unreal Tournament or something of that nature. If there's a perfect example of artists or labels that did this, go look at 720 Degrees, which was Blame's label. There's a comp on there called Two Revolutions. Just amazing comp, a lot of great artists on there, but that'll give you a good idea of this sound in general. Now, this is my twist on that sound, a little bit different, right? And you should definitely take what you see, take some of these pieces and make it your own, put your own spin on it. But without further ado, let's just go ahead and jump right into this. Now, on the drum side of things, typically it tends to lean a little more into those two-step type patterns. And personally, when I make drums and my tunes, I like to have the drums sit in the pocket and have the atmospheres, the synths, be a little more front and center. Again, that's just personal preference, but I'm front-loading this portion with that because my drums are pretty basic here. Right, so if I come in, I have a very basic two-step pattern here. And there are a lot of ways you could build these in terms of sound design. Some folks will just use drum machine sounds. What I like to do is just chop up drum breaks, different breaks that come from old school sample packs. So in Bitwig, I have this drum machine here, and you'll see I have a break beat in here. And I just took this kick out. And what's nice about break beats is you get those little ancillary hits from the break. Whereas if I just use like a drum machine, you just get that kick and nothing else. On this kick, right, I get that little hat shaker at the end of it. And that can help build some groove. Potentially, maybe I don't even need to put a hi-hat pattern in there because I'm getting it from that kick. So then I went and chopped out a snare from a break beat as well. This snare has a big reverb on it through the Arturia reverb intensity. Sounds like this. And that also has a little bit of a hi-hat on the end of it. Again, it's like getting free sounds 2 for 1 on that one hit there. Now, in this type of tune, if you're doing a more subdued drum pattern, I find having a really good snare can make or break the song, really. And it kind of creates this ostinato if you have that repetitive pattern, you know, that snare hit's coming, right, on the beats it's supposed to in a two-step, kind of just keeps that beat in the pocket and, again, can really transform the song. So I'd say, really focus on finding a good snare and keep in mind it doesn't have to be a typical snare. It can be something weird, something techie sounding, like a block hit or something of that nature. Now, in terms of the pattern, this is also very basic. So I have my basic two-step pattern here, kick, snare, kick, snare. Let's just solo that. And you'll hear those ancillary hi-hats from just the kick and the snare. I haven't programmed any hi-hats. That really helps bring that beat along. Now, I do have some slight variations here. So I have this two-step with a ghost note. So it basically adds an extra kick. Right, just to mix things up. And then I have a little bit of a turnaround at the end here. So all together, our 4-bar phrase here sounds like this. And what's great about Bitwig and something I like to do is instead of having one 4-bar clip, is I'll split up the different clips. So I have my basic two-step here. And then all these ghost notes and turnarounds, if I keep them in separate clips, I can create different variations of these and sprinkle them in throughout the song. So while the drums are still in the pocket, there's subtle variations in that. And what's nice in Bitwig is if you open the little clip launcher, you can kind of store these different variations off to the side. And then you can very easily just drag them onto the timeline like so. All right, bass. Bass is very simple. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I'm just using an 808 with a long tail that I threw in a Bitwig sampler. We have it in mono. I did a little bit of crazy EQ. Not going to go in super depth on that, but basically leaving a little room for the kick in that two-step beat. And we just have an 808 pattern here. Sounds like so. That's what we got. Very simple. If you want a video on how to make these 808 basses, I'll leave a link in the description. Go check it out. It's fairly simple to do. In terms of bass, though, I'll also call out, personally, I like 808s and sine waves, but a lot of folks in this genre would use some like really goofy, weird bass sounds, from something like a Prophecy or a Triton, but, mess around with it. Make it your own. All right, synths. This is one of the most important parts. Now, for synth sounds, for that futuristic, like Unreal Tournament sound, Romplers are the best. It doesn't get any better than Romplers, in my opinion. So Korg Triton would be a great synth to use for these sounds. And we'll look at this pad here first, which I'm just playing a minor 7 chord, and the pad sounds like this. So very basic sustained pad here, and in this song, I'm using a pad in the true essence of what it's supposed to be. It's padding the song. It's a little pillow for all the other sounds to sit on top of, helps fill up space, build up the atmosphere. Now, I have some subtle modulation on here, so if I open the Korg Triton, this is a 2 oscillator patch, the Cinema pad. I did modify the oscillators on here. But you'll see in Bitwig in the bottom left here, I'm using 2 LFOs. One to modulate the frequency on the filter for the second oscillator, as well as the panning that you can see up here. The Triton does have LFOs built in. I just find it's easier to use Bitwig's native ones. But the goal with the LFOs is to slowly modulate the sound so we get a little bit of movement. Even though that pad's sitting down low, I like to have some type of movement. And the filter frequency definitely helps. If the panning is very important too. So we're panning that second oscillator sound around in the stereo field, which just helps. I'm going to say atmosphere 20,000 times in this video. It helps with the atmosphere. So think about subtle modulations that you can do. And then I also have a phaser down here that I'm using, and that helps add to that movement. Very subtle. Panning, we have a very wide stereo pan here for the pad. EQ, I'm doing some pretty aggressive EQ, just trying to keep that pad subdued and sitting a little further back in the mix so the other elements can dance on top of it. Next thing I'm going to call out here is this little motion note guy. This is also coming from a Korg Triton. This is the Astral Dreams patch here. This is just playing a single note. I have it panned, narrowed a little bit, and it sounds like this. All right, so it almost sounds like a string, and there's a little bit of movement and modulation on that. It's going through a big delay here on Valhalla delay. And when you stack that with the pad, right, we have the pad kind of down low, this motion note up top. Right, so we're getting some movement from the pad, some movement from that motion note. Next thing we did is added in what I call the melody notes here. So also from a Korg Triton, this is the preset I used there. We messed with the panning, fanned it out a little bit, sent it through a big delay too. And this is playing a bit of a progression here with single notes, all in key. And that's just to progress the song. Right? So we have these static pads, we have that motion note. Yes, they're moving a little bit, but we still want some type of element in the song to kind of progress. So it sounds like this. So if we stack all those synths together, this is what we get. The last thing I'll call out here is an arpeggio that I set up here as well. So again, we're in that scientific realm. We want futuristic sounds. You'll hear a lot of leads or arpeggios using things like the Korg Prophecy here would be a great synth for this. And so you don't need to know music theory. As long as you're in key, you have the right chord, you can slap an arpeggiator device on there, right? We're panning this over to the left in mono, sending it through a big delay, big reverb, and the arpeggio sounds like this. So just a nice analog sound there. Sounds super Unreal Tournament T. And then when we stack it together, we get this. So just another element to add into there, right? Lead, arpeggio, however you do it, it's nice to get that additional level of progression and emotion into the song. So let's talk about effects now. Effects are one of the most important components of building any atmosphere tune. And I feel like it's often overlooked. People don't really talk about it. So, really we have some core elements here. We have the beat and the bass. We have the synths. The synths contribute to the atmosphere, but the effects really, it's like the icing on top, right? And so with effects at a high level, what I typically do is I go through old sample packs. It could be anything. I just need sounds to work with. And then I drop those sounds in as audio on the timeline. I time stretch them. I put them all in mono and then send them through some effects. But it's a process of just chucking shit in there, really, and seeing what works, manipulating it. Again, time stretching. This one I've time stretched, pitched it up a little bit. I've EQ'd all of these pretty aggressively to keep them pretty high up in the frequency range. I like effects to be a little thin sounding, and I think it just helps create this nice swirly, swooshy sound on top of everything. So all the effects together, if I just solo these, you'll hear those delays. The effects I have on there are pretty massive too. So with my delays, right, they're carrying on for 4 or 5 plus bars, which typically people would say, be very modest with your effects usage. I say the opposite with this type of thing. Don't be scared to use those effects. So usually also it's a good idea to test these effects out in context of the whole song. That could be said about any element, but really, when you're adding these effects in, try them with the synths playing at the same time so you get a good idea of how it all sounds. Now, the last thing I wanted to talk about here is just some very high-level tips and general notes. One is in terms of mixing, and that's the concept of group tracks. So for synths, for example, you'll see we have 4 different tracks, our pad, our ARP, the motion note, the melody notes. Throw them in a group track, and in Bitwig, it's very easy. We have the synths group track, and that way I can process all of those tracks together to create a little more cohesion. So on the synth group track, for example, I have a Fab Filter Saturn on there that's just saturating everything together. Right, and then I have my EQ to leave out, cut out some low end, leave room for the bass, as well as a limiter just to control volume and dynamics. So when you have everything in a group track, you can process it together. It's easier to make changes. Right? If I go, oh my God, these synths are too loud, I can just drag down the fader on that group track. Same thing for the effects track. Have saturation on there, EQ, and a compressor just to tame the dynamics. It just makes mixing a little bit easier. And I think it really helps with creating just a cohesive sound where everything's glued together. Next thing I want to talk about as well is just panning. Panning is super important, especially in an atmospheric tune. And ensuring things are panned appropriately, right? Like we looked at our pad earlier, very wide stereo pan. Whereas the arpeggiator, we have it in that top left corridor, right? Almost in mono there. The motion note, we have that panned accordingly. And then with the pad as well, we were messing with the panning of that oscillator in real time. So you can pan things on the track level, like a static pan, but you can also modulate the panning of different elements. What could sound cool is taking one of your effects and then automating a pan in that, some type of pan sweep. So from far left all the way to far right. But really think about panning, using it to your advantage to just create a really big landscape so you have that epic sounding tune. Last thing I'm going to call out here is just general inspiration. something I like to do when I'm building songs like this is grab like a cool picture, like a Bryce render, or have like a sci-fi movie on a second monitor, and I'll use that as the basis for my song. So I'll kind of watch that off to the side, and I almost treat it like I'm scoring or composing a song for that scene. Kind of just helps ground me, put myself in the mood to make something atmospheric, and gives me that visual reference point. So just a fun tip there. Find it helps me out. And then that's what you get, guys. So, we kind of chucked together a bunch of ideas here, and I'll just play the full thing. Hope you enjoyed the video. Peace out.